Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, January 21st, 2016. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, back inside our New York City studio. Great to have you with us, and great to be back with the A-team as well. You know that man, that is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post and SportsIllustrated.com. And of course, that is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. All right, guys. Great to be back here. Luke, we missed you last week, although Esther Lynn did a fantastic job.
First lady ever.
Yes.
So I guess that makes her the first lady of the MMA Beat?
I think that's accurate, yeah.
Chip Pettit was on the show, wasn't he?
Oh.
Whoa.
Wow, all right. I like it. Way to start.
Feisty.
All right, guys, lots to discuss. Busy weekend in Boston, but let's start with yesterday in Las Vegas. Now, this is interesting. You know, typically the UFC does these on-sale press conferences to announce that tickets are being sold for an upcoming event. They had that yesterday for UFC 197, which already is one of the more interesting events in UFC history, but it's rare that we ever break one of these press conferences down. I feel like we could do a whole hour on everything that happened yesterday in Las Vegas, in particular when it pertains to Conor McGregor. So let's start. I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot of layers, but just general overview. What was your biggest takeaway from what Conor in particular did yesterday in Las Vegas?
Oh, I don't think he missed a beat. You know, he picked up right where he left off with Jose Aldo. It feels like he knocked Jose Aldo out, went back, shaved his head, changed his clothes to something absolutely atrocious, and
now,
then...
wait a second.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That was good, Jeff Wagenheim. Comes back out and gets right back on the old Conor McGregor thing. I think that 197 is going to be hugely successful. Co-main event, not a lot going on there, but in the end, I don't think that'll really matter in terms of interpersonal rivalry. Interesting, some of the ways in which it's just funny, all these guys, we talked about this before the show, when they get these Conor McGregor fights, they're like, yes, don't come to 155, Conor McGregor, or whatever the case may be. And then he comes up and he gets it. And they treat his, some of his taunts I found quite repulsive. But anyway, his taunts generally with this stone silence, which only enables Conor McGregor to keep doing all the things that make him already powerful. Terrible strategy by Rafael dos Anjos. But in any case, it just seemed like the Conor McGregor show, the wheels have kept rolling. Nothing missed a beat. It was right where you thought it was going to be, and it's going to be a big event.
So a few of the highlights. He shows up around 30 minutes late. In fact, not only was he late, they had to start the press conference without him. He enters, maybe 5 or so minutes into it. So he starts late. It starts late because of him. He criticizes the UFC's marketing department in front of, you'd imagine, many UFC employees. He throws a lot of stones in Rafael dos Anjos' way. He compares himself to a drug lord. What else? He then
Me and Jesus are good.
Yes, he starts talking about Jesus. He also throws some compliments towards Jose Aldo. What stood out the most?
Kings MMA, a bunch of bones.
Kings MMA, yeah. There was a lot there. What stood out the most to you?
Well, I think what stood out the most was how he knows how to, both in the cage when he's fighting and even when he's talking, he knows how to find that precise little moment, that little spot where he can access you. And in the case of Dos Anjos, it was the idea that here's Jose Aldo, the guy I just knocked out, who went home after I knocked him out, and he mentioned that several times, to a hero's welcome. And then here's this other guy who abandoned his country and now lives in America. And when we take him back to Rio, he needs a hotel room. I mean, all this stuff which is something that's going to dig deep in Dos Anjos. Because think about it, Dos Anjos, before his most recent run, when since he beat Henderson and then Pettis and then Cerrone, before that, he had a kind of up and down career going. And contrast that with Jose Aldo, 10-year unbeaten streak. So you know that at some point during Dos Anjos' career, he was comparing himself or being compared to Jose Aldo, and not so favorably. So that's something that probably has been part of his experience in this sport for a long time. And McGregor knew how to zero in on it immediately and just go right there, pinpoint.
Yeah, I think that I agree with both you guys. Like, I thought he hit the ground running in the new year. I wasn't sure exactly what form you're going to catch him in. You sort of knew he'd have a new twist. He shows up, with the new Versace shirt, and he's got his head shaved, and maybe I won't even. I'll let you get on your pedestal in a minute on that. But anyways, he just showed up in that form, and I thought he was, he's very. It's clear he does his homework on his opponents. He just happens to know right away where he's going to turn the screw, and he's already got it all in his mind, exactly his approach on these things. I don't think he's sitting there rehearsing the mirror or anything like that. I think it sort of flies off, but he has a general idea of what he wants to do with his opponents to already start to win the mental game, and I thought we saw a lot of that just with this.
You wrote a column about the press conference that's on MMAfighting.com right now, and my favorite paragraph of the column was essentially to paraphrase. Every time you think he has jumped the shark, not only does he jump over it again, but he shoots it with a machine gun just to scold it for trying to get in the way.
Right.
And I think you nailed it, because that was the sentiment going into the Go Big press conference in September of last year. And people were like, oh, we're getting tired of him. He just went on this world tour. He's about to do The Ultimate Fighter. We need a break. And then he comes and does his thing, which to me was one of the great performances of his run thus far. And then yesterday he shows up with the shirt and the insults and all, and it felt like it went a whole other level. He continues to give us new material, recreating himself. It reminds me of the Roddy Piper line. Every time we think we have the answers, he changes the questions on us. And I thought you nailed it, so kudos on that.
Thank you. And it was also interesting, too, because we've been following this sort of subtext that's going on about Conor McGregor in the UFC, and he shows up, he's not on the, he's not carrying the bell on the promotional posters. He goes on a mini rant, basically, about that, and to me, there's this but even before that, I think it was John Morgan was asking a question before he arrived of, is there tension? He was asking something along those lines. Is this bothering you? Right as he sort of arrives at that moment. And Dana was basically answering like, we were good until this.
Yeah.
And you could just see these little things happening, and it becomes more and more fascinating to watch this thing unfold.
That reminded me, I don't know if you guys know this, there's a famous media scrum involving Stan Van Gundy, the former coach of the Orlando Magic, now the coach of the Detroit Pistons, where he's talking about how Dwight Howard was essentially trying to get him fired. And it's this revelation, and then Dwight Howard walks into the scrum and puts his arm around Stan and is like, hey, coach, everything good? And just like a minute earlier, he was telling everyone how this guy is trying to get him fired. And it was this completely awkward situation. It reminded me of that because Dana was almost about to open up about the state of the relationship, and then in comes Conor McGregor, and he's like, well, why don't you just ask him the question? Now, I don't want to speak for you, but you weren't. This wasn't a glowing. You were upset about something. Is that no? It bothered you?
I'm more upset by the reaction to what I said versus what Conor McGregor said.
Explain it to us.
Well, okay, so look, it's interesting. We have a term in the Marine Corps. We say so-and-so is full of vinegar and piss. That's when they come out, man, and you see these Marines, and they're just bricked up, and they're intense, and they spit tobacco juice whenever they talk, and they never sleep, and they run 300 PFTs. He starts all of his fights this way. The first presser is always the most outrageous, and then and we'll see what happens on this world tour. And then as you get closer to the fight, he begins to focus and narrow down. And after the fight, I find him to be absolutely charming, and he might be the smartest fighter in the game. Because to your point, and we talked about this before, he had Dos Anjos's gate numbers memorized. I don't know any fighter that does that besides him, maybe.
Height, reach,
everything. Yeah. The whole thing had he walked into that presser late and totally informed.
Yeah,
absolutely informed. It's just crazy, right?
Yeah.
But it was just funny to me that he, the digs he was taking. Look, let me just be 100% clear. I am not calling for a fine. I am not calling for censorship. I am not calling for any punishment of any kind whatsoever. But some of the things he said to me just seemed to fly in the face of basic decency. When you take this anti-immigrant stance, and people are like, well, he was talking about leaving teams. No, he mocked his children for having Americanized names, as if this, A, which is not true, and B, even if it was true, as if this is some sort of this is some letdown to Brazil. People like Rafael Dos Anjos and all immigrants like him, they make the country better. And I realize that's a sensitive topic for me. I don't expect others necessarily to pick it up. But when I sort of noted that this was sort of like a despicable thing to say, some of the people responses like, well, games are just games. You clowns. You expect me to believe this for 2 seconds? You think if there was a British guy who came out and did the Chael Sonnen to Anderson Silva bit and insulted the Irish and called them born losers and told them they'll never amount to anything? It's like, you know why you're rich now? Because you don't come from wealth. And they said awful things like that. You mean to tell me the Irish would look around and be like, ha, just games being games, you frauds. I don't believe you for 2 seconds. So another point is you get people like Ricardo Mayorga who go out and they do these homosexual slurs. Now, I don't put what McGregor said on any level of what Ricardo Mayorga has done. But if your argument is, well, it's just controversy for controversy's sake, you're right. But that argument gives home and allows something like Ricardo Mayorga to do something like homophobia or any other thing. And the current climate we live in today where the immigrant debate is a big part of the cultural conversation we're having in this country. Anyway, it's a long story, but I just feel like he can do whatever he wants, and he's a young man. He can make his decisions. But when you come out and you attack a guy for making the best decisions and being a father, one which I'm sure Rafael dos Anjos loves being away from his family in Brazil. I'm sure he's thrilled about it. It's just kind of tasteless.
So I agree with, or I understand your sentiment, I should say. I tend to believe that all's fair in fight promotion.
Yeah, look, whatever.
But there is a line. So let me ask you, did he cross that line?
Look, I made this point before when Betch Correia made the suicide comments. Mm-hmm. This affected me personally. Would I call for her to be censored? Never. McGregor's comments crossed my personal line of decency. But there is no such thing as a line. And to all his supporters' point, did it work? I mean, it got in my head. I'm sure it got in his head.
That's a great point.
I don't have to fight Conor McGregor, and I'm just trying to make a point like, look, man, you're a smart kid, you're a successful kid, and again, post-fight, he could not be smarter and more charming. I just found it a little tasteless is all.
Okay, so what did you make of the way RDA was taking this all in? Because I felt like it was 10-7 up until the stare down, and kudos to the UFC. They got that great shot of his eyes and the stare down. It seemed like for a second he was a little unsure of himself, and then he locked in on him with those eyes. Right. But throughout the press conference, to your point, it felt like he was just taking it. And especially when he started talking about his kids, man, I was like, how do you sit there? Unless I don't know, maybe it went over, I don't know. How do you sit there? I was surprised by that.
I was surprised that he sat there too, and I've heard and read people's comments saying that he should have tried to battle back with him. But, who in the game is equipped to compete with Conor McGregor on that playing field? Once they get in the octagon, it's a different story. But on the playing field of talk, there's just nobody that can compete with him. Maybe Nick Lentz, but no, there's really nobody out there. And so I thought there were some moments where I was surprised that he didn't react. But if you notice, every time they switched the shot over to RDA, he was sitting there. It looks like he was picking stuff off the table. It was like he was almost not even really trying not to listen. And I was thinking that maybe the Aldo fight was the best thing that RDA could have seen. He saw the lead up, and he saw Aldo getting more and more and more and more upset. And what did we see on Fight Night? We saw Jose Aldo go out there and not fight like Jose Aldo. Has Aldo ever gone out there and just gone forward at somebody like that? No, we've never seen that before. And so here's RDA, watching that and probably thinking, well, this guy's going to come at me next. I need to just back off and let him do all his talking, all the talk. Basically, who else? Do you really need a second guy to promote the fight and sell tickets? Not really. McGregor does all the talking. On those rare occasions when RDA did start talking, what happened? McGregor spoke over him and drowned him out. So, sit there stone-faced, give him like a nasty stare down. I'm fine with RDA's response.
I mean, the bottom line is, when is he ever known to be that guy to begin with, RDA? Sure. I mean, he's not like the type of guy who's going to talk like that. The only thing we really saw was him after the Donald Cerrone thing, basically warning McGregor about coming up and, facing his division, facing him. But I mean, I just don't think that's not going to be him. I don't think even during World Tour, whatever it is, I don't think he's going to be able to come out of it. We may see him get frustrated. We may start to see some of that stuff like we saw with Aldo, but I don't think it's just, there's so many guys, and you talk to them about like McGregor, and I remember I was just talking to Pearson about this, Ross Pearson in Boston. I said, what is the climate on, McGregor in the UK? And he's like, he's a global sensation. They care about him too. They're really behind him and all that stuff. But he's like, unfortunately, I don't have that personal charisma. I don't have that bombast within me to go around and just do that. He's like, I just want to fight. And I feel like RDA is sort of like that guy too. Like he wants his in-cage stuff to do the talking, and a lot of these guys do. And you put him in a realm, basically this whole big lead up where it's going to reach a crescendo, and I feel like they're going to contribute however they can, but it's weird. I don't feel like they can force themselves to then turn into different people and sort of combat it. You know what I'm saying?
McGregor is forcing them to compete in a game where they have no skills.
Yeah,
Right.
And it takes them out of their comfort zone.
And he likes to he likes to get there and be like, you know, you can't do this here. We both know that. Everyone watching knows that. Now watch me stunt. That's what he likes to do. And the guys, the only thing I thought Dos Anjos had as a decent reply was the correcting his Spanish into Portuguese, which was kind of funny. But even then, that's not. I mean, Conor McGregor doesn't care about that at all. You know.
Yeah.
Real quickly, this is just proof that this guy, if you're the first guy to beat Conor McGregor, I don't think it's going to be from a sneaky punch. It's going to be the guy that gets McGregor to second guess himself. Because as long as he is in this space where he's not just confident about his chances, but he feels like he is mentally shaping how you're thinking about things, he is so far ahead in terms of what he has to deal with that it's insurmountable to many degrees.
Let me ask you guys this: leading up to UFC 194, there started to be talk behind the scenes, growing talk that there's dissension between the UFC and Conor McGregor. This is not a new thing, and it's growing a little bit. And then yesterday he shows up late. This question is asked to Dana White. He says what he has to say, and then he starts talking about the poster and he starts criticizing the poster. And then Dana has his explanation, which is fine, but he says, look, it's for RDA's belt. But then we start thinking about UFC 94. and why is this fight happening at the end of the day?
Right.
It's happening because it's two champions. The world wasn't clamoring for RDA versus Conor McGregor. The world is clamoring, if you want to call it that, for two champions to collide and for Conor McGregor to make history. That's
It's a legit super fight.
yeah, well, that's the sell here. You know what I mean?
Right.
There are other fights that people want to see Conor in as well, but RDA is getting this because he's the champion. So to say that it's not, Conor's belt isn't on the line, so don't. To me, it feels like I thought a promotional malpractice. I mean, this is like, right? I mean, to not have it on the poster, to not have it on the desk. BJ and GSP, they did a world tour, they did an American tour and Canada tour, North American tour, and the belt, BJ's belt was there every step of the way. It's an important part of this story. So anyway, I thought, and I want to get your guys' take on that as well, the way they're promoting this, at least right now, and it'll be interesting to see if they change it and see how much influence Conor has. But what did you make of the vibe there? And I would have loved to have seen a 3-shot the whole time they were focusing on the people we're talking about. What did you guys make of the vibe between Conor and in particular, the UFC, Dana, what he was saying? I mean, we've never heard someone criticize the promotion while sitting up there, going into an event of their own.
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have seen Dana's face as that criticism was happening. Short of that, it's hard to say how they react to it. I guess I just agreed with McGregor there because in the last fight, didn't we see a lot of Aldo with his belt and McGregor with his pretend belt? I mean, really.
Even with that, yeah.
And let's face facts. That was not a real championship belt. You don't get a belt by beating the second best guy. You get a belt. Now he has a real belt. He beat Aldo. He has a real belt. He's a real champion. Why would that belt not be on the poster? Why would that belt not be on the dais? I mean, it made perfect sense. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's that important that the UFC and Conor McGregor are all chummy. We said this last week on this show. The money that he earns for the UFC is going to be just as green whether they love him or whether there's a little bit of tension. I don't think it makes so much difference. Yeah, he's kind of breaking that little wall by criticizing the people who make the posters and all that stuff. But don't think those are ideas that other people have thought too. I mean, I think when you look at that poster, didn't you think, well, why is McGregor behind it?
But they also all look the same now.
Yeah.
Right? There's a look to every one of their shows, and it's all looking the same. And I think he raises a good, but like boxing posters, you know what I mean? Like I remember Lewis Tyson is on. You remember that? Like
there's a bar here in New York City. I can't remember the name. It's actually in Times Square. You go in. It's like a narrow shoebox, and the entire walls, all of them, are just nothing but old school fight posters.
Yeah.
And there's some ones with Sonny Liston in there, and they're really, really. I don't know. It makes you appreciate the long tenure of boxing's place in sports history.
Isn't that the place?
It might be it. I've always been hammered there that I can't remember.
What about when he keeps saying like, we're sending RDA on this promotional tour. I wanted Holly home.
We were booking him a hotel room.
Yes, we. I wanted Holly home. Like he's dropping these little things that I don't know if this is just part of his shtick or.
Well, it's like the burgeoning subtext of this whole thing being this Conor Inc. thing, right? Like this whole
Yeah.
thing. He's basically allying himself with the UFC, partnering with them. Like he's equal to everything that's happening. And come on, guys, that's got to be something that's irking the UFC. I don't know if this particular thing is them just saying, let's clip his wings just a little bit here and make, you know what I mean? Like, let's just do some psychological things.
Taking away the belt?
Yeah, taking away the belt. I don't know what it's going. But clearly, the play has been this whole time that he's coming up to challenge for the belt, but it's a champion versus champion. I mean, that has been the play. So I found it very odd. I thought he had a legitimate thing, and I do feel like there's some behind-the-scenes collisions going on that we just. We're catching little glimpses in these public things, but we're not really seeing the full thing.
I mean, I hope it's not what you just said. The idea of them maybe trying to clip his wings a little bit. Well, we're not going to put your belt up there. I mean, I hope that's not it because, this is about promoting a fight. They're trying to make the most money possible. That's what the UFC's goal is. Whether Conor McGregor is saying we're sending RDA to Brazil or he's whatever he's doing, it kind of reminds me of one of your favorite things, the pro wrestling world with like the WWE that has all those like sub promotions and they sometimes act as though they're completely separate companies. McGregor is sort of trying to pretend that he is his own company.
His own entity, yeah.
But bottom line, at the end of the day, as he always says, I get the check and I cash the check. What does the check say on the top of it? It doesn't say McGregor Promotions. It says UFC or Zuffa. I mean, I would hope that the UFC sees the bigger picture here and knows that regardless of how he's presenting himself and what he's saying about their people designing posters and any things that he says, it's all part of the promotion. It's all about generating more interest and getting people in their seats.
I tend to agree with you because I think that they wouldn't give him this opportunity if they hated him, and they understand that he brings in a lot of money, big gates and whatnot, but it's going to be interesting to see what changes along the way leading up to this fight. Final point on this, because we have to move along, there's a lot of news this week. You didn't love the El Chapo stuff.
No.
A lot of people found it funny, amusing.
Yeah, it's fine.
Explain to us why.
Well, real quickly,
Okay.
the Instagram pictures of Dana and Conor have vanished. They don't happen like they used to.
Meaning them hanging
No,
out.
I mean they're still there, the original ones, but
Yeah.
I mean you don't see a lot
Yep.
of them being really chummy anymore. I also think, just quickly in the UFC's defense, they don't do super fights that often, and I think they still are kind of fumbling with it a little bit in terms of how to make it that much more special, right? They're trying to make it feel like it's just another title fight. It's not, though.
But
It's-
UFC 94, they made it special.
Okay, I'm not saying that they may not be trying to clip his wings. I'm just saying, generally speaking, I think they struggle with super fights because they don't get them very often. There's that. But in terms of the El Chapo stuff, again, people are going to have different lines in the sand. They're going to have different senses of what accounts for basic decency. And someone asked me a good question on Twitter, actually. They go, what's the difference between what McGregor's doing and Nikita Krylov calling himself Al Capone? And frankly, in principle, I'm not sure there is much difference. And I'm sure I have made some off-color joke about something that makes me a total hypocrite.
No, I've never.
Believe it or not, Chuck Mindenhall, believe it or not. I just feel like in the end, El Chapo destabilized his own country. And there are victims that exist today that are our age, whose family members are dead, whose family members are missing, and whose lives have been ruined. It's one thing when, 60 years have passed and you kind of, everyone sort of, you don't know anyone that like that, but you speak to any Mexican MMA journalist and they'll tell you that everyone they know in their lives has been touched by this. I just felt like, again, it's not the end of the world. I'm not calling for it to be fine. It's just it lacks basic decency.
You have to admit the handshake thing. I mean, just to recreate ridiculous moment in time.
I will never accuse Conor McGregor of not being clever as hell. He's super clever.
At what point did you guys realize that that's what he was doing?
It took me a second too. It wasn't until I saw the photo after the fact
Sure.
I was like,
I was like,
you sly
That is something.
bugger.
You got to give him credit for that. I mean, he's really playing on a different.
There should be one more. I know I'm hogging this topic, but there's one thing here quickly to note. Everyone was like, well, it's just games. You mean to tell me now? Snake in the grass is a phrase that's quite memorable. But if you look at TJ's anything he does in social media, how your Ralph Haber was talking about on your show, snake in the grass, snake in the grass, snake in the grass. I would very much hate for Dos Anjos, when this fight is all over, to still be called those things,
Sure.
because McGregor's words are so impactful and his fans are so driven by them. I think that would be a real pity if that had to happen to him.
Okay, let's leave it there. Let's move along. I want to talk about BJ Penn because this story continues to escalate. And then Dana White yesterday tweets out that the Prodigy is returning. So I guess confirming that he's on board with this idea. He was on the MMA Hour on Monday, officially ending his retirement. Throughout the offer once and for all to Nick Lentz, who appears to have not accepted his terms, and he's back. Now, I want to get your take on this, but I will say this. I've talked to BJ Penn twice in the last 8 months. Once right before he was elected or inducted into the Hall of Fame, and then once on Monday. Right before he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he sounded completely depressed. He seemed unhappy. I mean, it was almost an uncomfortable conversation. It felt, his voice on Monday was completely different. It felt like the clouds had opened. And I know you can't hang your hat on that, and this happens a lot in the fight game. People come out of retirement. But it was just very interesting to hear the difference in his voice in the span of 6 months or so. Now that it's actually happening, I know we talked about it last week, you weren't there, but now that it's actually here and happening and you heard him, what's your take on all of this?
Man, I go both ways, to be completely honest. It's the version that we saw of BJ Penn in that last fight, which he was retired. He came out of retirement because of specifically Frankie Edgar he was going to face. He wouldn't come out, and otherwise he was 145 pounds. We had all these sort of peripheral reasons to be interested in this. They coach tough, all that stuff. But to see the version that actually came out and had nothing for Edgar and the way he went down, and to go into that press conference and hear him basically crying and turning the room into something I've never felt before, just a very sad ending to his fight career, is something that's sort of indelible in your mind. You just see that's just something you're going to think about. So at the same time, I was like, that's a hell of a way to go out. I hope we don't remember that side of BJ Penn. You remember all the good things that like he did prior, going all the way back, a decade. But here we are again, and he's doing it. And so my first thought is like, what? Why? Why would you do this? Why would you go through this again? But over the course of time, you do realize that fighters, they just don't, the sunset's pretty for everybody, but it's very difficult for people to go towards it, for people to actually ride off into it. And he was coming off of something, you can see it as a competitor, him, and a guy who sort of has never operated off of everybody else's expectations to begin with. He made a career out of basically being BJ Penn, like doing things the way BJ Penn liked to do them. And you think about all that and you think, maybe we should have saw this coming a little bit. I just never really thought about it. I just thought we'd seen the end of him, but maybe we should have seen this coming. And then it starts to make somewhat sense. If he's going to call somebody out, in my mind, it would be somebody like more of a middling name like Nick Lentz, or it's going to be something like that to sort of get his feet under him or something. I think where I started to really draw the line is like on your show saying he was going after the belt, things like that. I'm like, ooh, that's the part that I'm like, I don't know, man. To me, that seems like delusional. You know what I mean? I'm happy if he's got the pep back in his step and all that stuff, but to me that seems a little delusional. I am a little bit intrigued though, guys, as far as the Jackson Winklejohn stuff. You kind of want to see, I guess, if it's going to play out. You'd like to see what they do with him. You'd like to see what he does, but ultimately that's about it. I'm torn. I go both ways on this whole thing.
Yeah, I think we were a little more enthusiastic. At least I was a little more enthusiastic last week during the show, and I think you were as well. And I've kind of tempered a little bit. Maybe more reality is setting in. But think about the other guy who we keep talking about as maybe coming back, is George St. Pierre. And there's a guy who went out on top. I know that there were issues about him being burned out and he got beat up in his last fight, but he walked out with that championship belt and marched off into the sunset. And I've been one of those guys who've been like, stay, don't come back. That was a great exit. BJ Penn, by contrast, did not exit the sport very gracefully. He had, as Chuck just described, that really awful performance against Frankie Edgar. And I know last week we also said, well, hey, we got to give some credit to Frankie Edgar. It wasn't just BJ Penn out there. There was a guy who was really good he was competing against. But I feel like in that performance, no matter who he was performing against, as long as it was a good, legitimate guy, he was not looking very good. So he left sort of at the bottom of the sport in a lot of ways. So in some ways, you could understand a really competitive guy wanting to not have that be the last thing you see from him. And so you see why he might want to come back. And look, he's a big boy. He has to make his own choices. I'm going to watch. If you use a double negative, I'm not going to not watch. I'm not going to ignore it. But I do have a kind of a mixed feeling about the whole thing as well.
If somebody has earned the right to be given the benefit of the doubt about turning guys around, it is certainly Greg Jackson. Greg Jackson telling MMA Junkie that he thinks Penn has 2 to 3 years more. I find that deeply implausible, but I found lots of things deeply implausible that I was proven to be wrong about regarding Greg Jackson and his ability to turn guys around. So in that sense, I will back off from things. I'm actually the opposite of you, Chuck, when you're saying I doesn't want to go for the title. I only want Penn around if he can reasonably beat good people. If he's just hanging around to collect a check, I find that to be a total non-starter for me, as long as it's in the UFC. And if he gets cut or out of his contract in some way and wants to go beat up people, far below his level in Bellator, that's a
Is
different...
Lentz in that department, or is...
We don't know. We don't know, right?
For you?
Yeah, if he can beat Lentz is a competitive featherweight, sure. If he can beat Lentz, I think,
Lightweight now.
Yeah, lightweight now. Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That kind of caliber of opponent. But for me, it's interesting. When a lot of state commissions, when you get past the age of 35, they ask for additional medical screening for your health. BJ Penn is 37 years old. And so for me, it's like, even if he comes back, something did feel unresolved. The guy went out of the game, and this is not a knock on BJ Penn, it's just the reality of MMA. He went out of the game on his hands and knees. Not quite literally, but almost, right?
Yeah.
And I think that never sat well with him. Remember he got in the bar fight in Hawaii not too long ago?
Yep.
He just had some kind of seething anger and issues he had unresolved. And so in that sense, if he's going to have the right program around him and he's really kind of serious about competing, let's see what he's got. And he can pass medical screenings, let's see what he's got. But I'm worried about, everyone's like, Greg Jackson said, what does he have to lose? You mean brain cells?
Yeah.
The guy is almost 40. Yeah. And you were talking about accumulated trauma here to the brain. There's plenty to lose here. This is not some consequence-free endeavor. So I'm not worried about so much about BJ Penn's legacy, but if he is there to compete, Greg Jackson does deserve the benefit of the doubt, and I'll keep my mouth shut until then, and we'll see what he does.
It's funny, too, because we've had this conversation similar to this recently with the whole Fedor coming out again, but he actually sort of padded the end. He bookended his career with a couple of easy wins at the very end before he walked off, obviously. But I felt like we were having a conversation about, does he go to the UFC and actually make a run at things? Because other heavyweights had sort of turned around, like Arlovsky, or does he just do what he did essentially and just make a couple more appearances, And I guess I'm more in that sense. I'm in reverse because I kind of wanted to see Fedor against the guys in the UFC. In this sense, and partially because it is heavyweight, and we had seen guys doing that. We know that he's capable of doing some. That he can beat anybody on a given night, I think. But in BJ's Penn case, I just feel like right now, I was talking to Jordan Breen about this. You have to go, his only win in the last 5-6 years is that one against Matt Hughes at 123. That's a long time to look pretty bad and to kind of spiral to where he's at. So I don't know, man. I'm like, I'd rather see him at least, if nothing else, against a guy like Nick Lentz or below even, just to see where he's at before I start thinking about the greater pasture of the title.
And not only a guy at that level, but also a guy who's a wrestler, grappler. So, he's not going in there against the guy who is whose game is predicated on knocking the crap out of you. Obviously Nick Lentz can throw a punch and he can land it and he can hurt BJ Penn badly if the punch lands the right way. But most likely Lentz is a guy who's going to want to go in there and play on the ground with him, and that's a place where BJ has always felt comfortable, and it's also a place where maybe there's less chance of him suffering all that damage that you're talking about, because I agree with you. That's when you get to that age as a fighter, and if you've been away from it for a while, man, it's just you don't want to go back and suffer that damage again.
So I'm on board 100%. For four simple reasons.
No.
For four simple reasons. Difference in his voice. Difference in his voice. I think
his attitude does appear to be changed.
Okay, difference in his voice. Second of all, and we said this last week, but it's worth repeating. At this point, I know for a fact, Greg Jackson and Mike Winklejohn, I think it's important to mention his name when we're talking about this as well. These guys have done it all. They've proved it all. They don't need this. They do not need this. They turn down people all the time. The fact that they're on board, and even Greg telling me that he's excited about it, when I know that at times these days in MMA, it takes a lot for him to get, as excited as he once was. That he's excited about this project, that he's going to hang his hat, he's going to put his reputation on the line. That says a lot. They're not doing this if they don't believe to some degree in his ability. So that's the second reason. The third one is, he did talk about the featherweight title. It's important to note that, but the fact that he's shooting for Nick off the bat tells me that he's actually not as delusional as we may think. Yeah. Because, why does BJ Penn have to come back to fight a Frankie Edgar, who may be the second or third best featherweight in the world? Why not fight the top 20 guy and see where you're at and then take the next step? And by the way, this is 3B, he's trained with Nick Lentz. So he has to have some knowledge there and know how he did against him. And he was saying that Nick was running out of the gym. Who knows if that's true.
Don't save me.
But you know what I'm saying? So he knows that. And then most importantly, I think that sometimes when we talk about guys coming back, we have this blanket rule like this is bad. You know, we don't want to see them get hurt. And I agree. And sometimes we need to, or the people around them need to save themselves from themselves. But sometimes it's actually safer and healthier for the fighter, in my opinion, to just keep this train moving along, because you could do a whole lot more damage. To your point, he's getting in bar fights outside. The guy may have been lost,
particularly in his case.
and you know, and maybe he just needs this. You know, and I'm reminded of what Chris Lieben said on Monday. Like, he's a much safer and healthier and sober person when he's just training for a fight. Now, Chris Lieben probably shouldn't be fighting, but look what happened to him. He just went to jail when he was retired. You know, when he was on that train and fighting Akiyama, and he was okay. You know, I'm not saying he was a choir boy, but these guys need. It's easy for us to say just retire, but what do they do? BJ Penn's not going to run a gym. He's not going to run those UFC gyms. He's not going to coach a team. He needs this. And the fact that he left home to go to Albuquerque, a guy who notoriously didn't like to leave his comfort zone, the fact that he's not leaving until his fight, I think says a lot about his mental state. That he needs this. He wants this. He's leaving his kids. So that's why I'm on board. I think he's actually saving himself by doing this.
Look, I think if you mapped out any kind of comeback, there's a range of possibilities about what could happen, right? So there's a lot of ways this could go good. There's a few ways it could go really good. There's a lot of ways it can go bad. You know, he has accumulated damage. However motivated he may be, he doesn't take a shot like he used to. He just doesn't.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think he's completely gone in that capacity at all. I'm just saying, you know, you want to fight a new crop, a new generation of fighters. You know, be careful what you ask for, because they're gonna dish it out. And you know, I don't know. I could be wrong about it, but on the one hand, I feel like there's some sort of literary sense about being unresolved, a little Count of Monte Cristo going on. Another part of me feels like there's just a whiff of desperation here too. And you know, again, I think the tutelage of and the what do you want to call the ownership of the process by Jackson and Wigglejohn is worth everyone backing off and saying, okay, let's see what you can do. I think they've earned that right. I'd certainly grant it to them. But I'm telling you, I'm doing one of these numbers, or maybe even one of these numbers, looking through my fingers, because, I mean, you can will yourself to greatness, but there's biological limits to everything.
Okay, let's move along. Obviously, the big story of the weekend, Dominick Cruz. The return of Dominick Cruz. He is now the undisputed bantamweight champion. Super close fight. We don't need to break that down. That's been discussed at this point. But I want to ask you guys, because I think that sometimes in the aftermath, when we do these post-fight wrap-ups and stuff, it's the greatest fight of all time. It's the greatest win. It's the greatest upset. It's the greatest this. But 4 or 5 days removed, I am maybe even more in awe of what he did. And especially watching it again on television, I feel like that was the greatest athletic achievement that I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes. For a guy to come back from 3 ACL surgeries and the other injuries as well, a torn groin, by all accounts, that was a horrific injury as well. And to move like that and to perform like that and to win, forget about MMA, sports. I've never seen anything like that. Am I crazy here, or do you guys agree with me? Anyone?
Crazy.
Jeff?
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you are crazy.
Yes, I agree. You're crazy.
Okay. You've been around the longest. You've been watching sports since the 30s.
You know, yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, you know, the day that Babe Ruth came out and you know, pointed to me first, and then he pointed to call the shot. That was pretty amazing. Yeah, look, I have been around enough to have seen some pretty amazing athletic achievements, both in person and on television. This was one I did attend this fight, so I had to put that into the.
And by the way, it was nice of you to finally attend a fight after your 5-year hiatus.
Thank you very
Welcome
much.
back.
Yeah, well, you know, they I thought I was out, but they dragged me back in.
Very nice.
Yeah, so I was in person at this one, and so I had to put it in that category. And certainly of things that I've seen, it was up there. And when you look at the backstory, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what athletic achievement. I'm not sure whether I would say it's the greatest athletic achievement, but certainly an achievement in perseverance and believing in yourself.
Fair.
And I don't know. I mean, I guess I did go into it picking him, so it wasn't like on fight night I went in and said, oh my God, I can't believe he just did this. I kind of expected him to, well, I expected him either to fulfill my prediction, which was to do sort of what he did, or it was going to be the opposite. Excuse me. The opposite was going to happen. He was going to go out there and be a shell of himself. And TJ Dillashaw, who I really didn't think was a fighter on his level. I mean, I think that if this fight, if they rematch, if that ends up being the thing, and you give Cruz now more time to prepare for it, I think the margin will be farther away. I think that he's that much better. But and I think we saw that. We saw 3 rounds of him being schooled and throwing punches that were missing by that much. Dillashaw.
Although according to Bang Ludwig, that was part of the game plan.
That was part of the he was hoping to he was hoping that
That's what he said.
They missed on 300 shots.
I know
I wonder how many of those were planned.
I know that Dillashaw has power in his fist, but I didn't know it was wind power.
That's right.
So
wind power.
Anyway,
what do you think?
Well, personally speaking, I can't recall something like that. To be completely honest, I mean, we talked a little bit about this in our wrap-up show, but I mean, it's not just. I mean, the physical aspect of it, what he went through with 3 different ACLs, the torn groin, all that stuff is just part of it. It's really the 4 years essentially of not fighting. He did have that one fight in there, but 4 years essentially of just not performing, watching the landscape change before him, watching a guy who everybody says fights like you take the belt. Processing that as you go, seeing that guy beat Renan Barão, whom you were supposed to face and you knew you had the blueprint to beat, but him getting those accolades for actually doing it, not once but twice, and all that stuff, you get into all that, and it's just that mental process with those injuries. I cannot recall seeing somebody come into that form and just handle himself in every possible way, and I'm talking about just the lead up to that fight, the way he talked about his confidence, never backing down from the whole thing, to showing up like Willy Wonka and rolling in the cage as fun at his own expense, to just the way he performed in the cage that night and his movement being spot on. I know you can speak more of like the whole technical side of it, but like to me, he looked like himself plus some. He's going against a guy who everybody was now considering one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world, and he's doing that to him after all of that. To me, that was a feat that I've never seen before. I can't, even in other sports, you just pan all sports, I can't think of something equivalent to that.
It's interesting to me that, I would put Cruz up there with Conor McGregor in terms of the most mentally strong guys, but for different reasons. It's interesting to me that both McGregor and Cruz suffered ACL injuries, and I feel like from that rebirthed in a kind of a way.
Great point.
2 different kinds of ways. McGregor, I think, learning the physical nature of himself and maximizing it, and I think in the case of Cruz, I thought he was going to have a Count of Monte Cristo vibe, but your post-fight interview with him was so revelatory.
Wow, that last answer.
I gotta be honest, it took my breath away.
It took 100%.
It took my breath away because he was not out there for revenge or some sense of purpose of proof. He was simply there to compete. The only way to do what he did is you have to be ahead of your time, and your peers are playing catch up while your feet are kicked up. It's just unbelievable. You can't do. You look at and beyond that, the graveyard of professional athletes. How about Radamel Falcao? If you've watched a little bit of soccer, now there's some evidence to say he was maybe on the decline before that. Had one ACL tear, missed the World Cup, comes back and is a shell, a nothing in response. Adrian Peterson may be a different, ACL surgeries are getting better, but so many guys was everything, and this guy is the bionic man and looked incredible. I just couldn't. There's nothing. I've never seen anything. This guy was eaten by a shark, and somehow survived. And then came back and you beat this other guy who, this is the interesting part about it, TJ Dillashaw looked really good.
Yeah.
He looked really good in this fight, and he still got beat.
Yeah, I actually researched a little bit of the history of multiple ACL surgeries as far as athletes are concerned. There's actually a guy on the Carolina Panthers, Thomas Davis, who has had 3 ACL surgeries on the same knee. So that's different than Dominick, 2 and 1.
And the groin tear.
Yes, and the groin tear. He's, the Panthers are doing great. He's an all-pro and all that. So Dominick's a little different. I'm not saying that no one's ever come back from injuries, but to just move that way, unfathomable in my opinion. Now, there's this debate, what do they do next? Dillashaw 2, Faber 3. What do you do for the UFC?
well, I think that they're papering the cage here for a Faber fight. It seems like that's the one that Cruz wants, and it's funny. You contrasted Cruz with McGregor. McGregor, as a promoter, is a one-man show. He didn't need RDA to help him at that press conference yesterday. But Cruz, what did we hear from Cruz the whole time in the lead up to his fight? He kept complaining that Dillashaw wouldn't talk to him, wouldn't talk back.
Yeah.
And even I think it was last night on UFC Tonight, he was saying how, well, at least Faber will talk. And so I think that he clearly wants that, because unlike Cruz, I don't think that Dominick is a one-man show when it comes to promoting something. And they all want, the game is different now that Conor McGregor has shown that if you talk enough and you talk the right way, you build things up, you can make a mega bucks. Cruz is a good talker, but he's not on that level. And I think he understands that what he needs next is to have somebody who's going to come right back at him, and that would be Uriah Faber. Now, I don't think Uriah Faber merits a title fight. I don't think he's really earned a title fight, but I don't feel as though that division has an obvious contender. So when you don't have an obvious contender, you can give it to Faber, you can give it to back to Dillashaw, you can throw a Sun Tzu in there. I mean, there are some options, and when the champion is calling out a particular guy, and champions don't tend to call out people, I guess let them have it.
In some ways, it's a little deceiving because, first of all, the whole thing was left unresolved with Faber and Cruz. I mean, you go back to them taping that whole episode of Tough, and that didn't get a culminate in that trilogy. So there's all of that you still have in play, their rivalry and stuff. But in some ways, it's deceiving with Faber because his only real loss since the Barao one that happened was to Frank Edgar, 145 pounds. Technically, he's won 5 fights in a row at 135 pounds. I mean, that still should speak somewhat to his case to get that shot. And I honestly, when I think about it, I'm like a more competitive fight. You probably say Dillashaw because we're fresh off that, but when you look about Cruz's, the storylines are so rich there too because Cruz's last loss was against who? It's against Faber, so it's the rubber fight.
Only loss, right?
Yeah, his only loss. So it's like, to me, I think you got to sort of cash in with that right now because you also have with Dillashaw too. He's got an unresolved sort of rematch he could take with a Sun Tzu. I mean, to me, that would be like a great. You have your contender fight right there. As long as you get both guys to sort of understand that, I think you kind of have it all built up to be what it needs to be. But to me, it's kind of paved for Faber to get that next shot.
And what's up with Barao? I mean, I know that he's not going to be the guy in line because he's been his last 2 fights were knockout losses. But
he's moving up.
Is he definitely said he's going to move?
Pretty much, yeah.
I thought that it was still up in the air.
No, he's going to go.
All right.
Yeah.
I don't have much to add. I just feel like the Faber fight's the right way to go. And look, poor TJ Dillashaw. I think there's enough ingredients there to call for a rematch. I understand why he wants one, and it was razor close. I think Cruz won, but I have no issue with a 48-47 TJ Dillashaw card. It's eminently justifiable, and he just suffers from the fact that there's so many immediate rematches now. And we'll see what happens with Rockhold and Weidman.
Yeah.
That in that climate, it's going to be very, very tough for him when they have this money fight they can do with Faber. So I feel bad for TJ Dillashaw, but them's the breaks, I guess.
Okay, let's move along. There's so much going on. This could have been a 3-hour show. I've had to mentally skip over a lot of topics because I think it's important to talk about this one. On the first episode ever of this show, when it was just, I believe, me, you, and Mike Chiappetta. Poor Mike Chiappetta, who was insulted at the beginning of this episode.
I apologize, Mike. That was.
I essentially told everyone watching that this was a show about the MMA Beat, which means the stuff that we covering the sport on a daily basis. And sometimes on this show, this may not be of interest to the casual fan, but I like to talk about the actual MMA Beat. And a story came up late last week that pertains to this topic, perfectly, the Kenny Florian situation with Fox Sports. So the story by now. He has been suspended because he was accused of plagiarism. He wrote an article on foxsports.com breaking down the Dillashaw Cruz fight, and it came out later that a paragraph, a couple sentences was.
It's a lot more than that.
It was more. Okay, so
it was several instances
in that particular article.
Yeah.
So a paragraph or so.
More than that.
More than that of a great boxing analyst who I think a lot of us have. Found out about for the first time.
Sure.
Individual on Twitter named Lee Wiley, who does great, YouTube breakdowns, and I think these people are sort of the unsung heroes of the internet. These men and women who break things down for free, just trying to make a name for themselves. An unfortunate situation, to say the least. So it comes out, and it was I think an embarrassment for Kenny and for Fox and everyone involved, and he was put on the shelf for a little bit. So this brings up the topic of plagiarism, which is one that we haven't really had to deal with, I think, on our beat all that often. Hasn't been, there haven't been many instances. So for me, I have to preface by saying, I work with Kenny. I'm a colleague of Kenny's. I consider him that, and a friend as well. He's been great to me over the years, working with him for the last 4.5 years or so for Fox. So it's a tricky one for me. And I'm happy to weigh in as I did on Monday on the show. But I want to get your take, because you guys are veterans of the sport. When you heard about it, when you saw how he dealt with it, when you saw how Fox dealt with it, and how he has dealt with it since, what's your take a week later now?
Isn't it so bizarre? The whole thing is so weird because you fought professionally in more than 2 weight classes. You got title shots across 2 weight classes, he would be the last person that would need to get help in analyzing a fight. It just seems so. If someone asked me to write a paper on the Hadron Collider, I would need a little bit of assistance. I might go and plagiarize, right? I would need some help. But not if someone asked me, what's it like to be on the MMA Beat? I wouldn't need a whole lot of assistance regarding that. I wouldn't take your notes anyway. So there was that. The second part.
Where's your hat?
Yeah, exactly. Look, the only thing for me is we can't prove that he took these and tried to maliciously pass them off. I found his explanation, while potentially plausible, at a minimum, it demonstrates that his research methods are absolute trash. If you're taking notes and then you can't tell the difference between your notes and your cribbed versions of someone else's words, you need to rethink how you do research, because that is just absolutely unforgivably poor. I mean, research has to have a process. It has to be done a certain way. So I don't know what to say about that. Long story short, I don't think he should be fired. Once you lose a job in this industry, you kind of just lose the industry. And I would hate for that to happen to him. I don't think it's of that kind of consequence where that has to happen. But I just found his explanation a little hard to swallow. I know good people who have committed plagiarism out of panic. I spoke for a friend of mine at a college. We went to college together, and he had to suffer some consequences. But he admitted, yes, I stole this paragraph, and they gave him, I think, an automatic D or something like that. But anyway, long story short, it just seemed so unnecessary for him to do this.
Well, you mentioned one of the first things you mentioned, I think, is kind of a key thing we shouldn't gloss over: the fact that Kenny fought in the cage for a long time, and that's where he made his name, not by going to J school anywhere. And so some of those research methods, a guy who made his living as a fighter, not as a journalist coming up, there's a little bit of insecurity. You want to have something.
He has a college degree. If you go to, he went to a nice, good division.
No, he went to Boston College. That's like a remedial high school. You
know my point. When you go to a Division I school like that, and that's a top 25 school in the country, they tell you you have to take don't you have to take an honor pledge at your college? I mean, you should know about these things.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, even his research methods, I wouldn't say that I've ever done anything like that in terms of plagiarizing, but there have been times when I have been just taking various notes on things, just trying to write down thoughts, and then at some point thought, geez, now where did I get this from? And not that I would then say, well, this must be my original thought, but I wasn't sure what source to cite. And I don't think I can't think of a time where I've used something and had the wrong source, but I could see how something like that might happen if you're not paying close attention. For me, this kind of thing comes down to a pattern. That's really what really has to happen when we're assessing something like this, in my view. Jason Blair of the New York Times, he's not the poster child for plagiarism because he plagiarized one story. It was because he repeatedly plagiarized this. Well, as soon as they found one, then all of a sudden they peeled the onion back and another one and another one and another one and another one. Now I know there's been people looking into some things with Kenny. Nothing that I've seen online. Now I haven't been watching it that closely, but nothing I've seen online has seemed very credible in terms of reaching beyond this one story and finding a pattern of plagiarism from Kenny. So in my mind, I mean, I understand why Fox needed to suspend him. They want to maintain their reputation. I tend to look at something like this and say, well, I will look at your longer track record, and if this was an isolated incident and you can identify what you did wrong and you are apologizing for it, I do say, he gets his slap and we can move on, assuming that nothing else comes out that shows that there's a pattern here.
I have a lot of respect for him. I mean, he's been doing it for a long time. You were mentioning working with him at Fox. I mean, even going backwards, while he was still active, he was working at ESPN as an analyst, and he was breaking down fights. To me, it's a really weird thing to contemplate a guy having to lift anything to break down a fight, because that's what he does. That's his natural ability. That's what they're paying him to do. And I suppose that's one of the weird parts about it, because you're like, his credibility is based on his ability to analyze, and if it takes it from something else, he loses that credibility, which is a weird thing. I tend to give him the benefit of the doubt because I have not seen any other evidence that basically says that he's been doing this his whole career or anything like that. I find it sort of like you said, it's hard to believe that he would mistake his own voice or whatever you want to call it for the writing with some notes that he picked up elsewhere. But it's sort of it's an unfortunate thing. And as writers, as journalists, as people who've been in this field long enough, plagiarism is one of those ugly words. You know, it's like it follows you. It's like cheat, imposter. You know those words? I'm a coward. When people call you those types of things, they stick with you. People remember these words. And unfortunately, this is one of those weird ones. You feel it's so unnecessary because he's that smart. That's why I say he's smart enough where I tend to believe that it was a mistake, that it was probably an isolated incident, and the slap on the wrist is probably more than enough in this instance. He's not a writer. And actually, from his response, you know, in his first tweet about it, I sort of felt like that was his innocence showing out there. He's like, you know, the only person who should be bad at this is the author, not everybody else. I don't think he understood the scope of what that means. You know, like, truthfully, what plagiarism and what that really implies about your credibility and the dent that puts on your character.
It's like PEDs. I mean, this is, if the fighters have PEDs, this is the writer's version of a PED in a sense, really.
People are accustomed for content on the internet to be here one day, gone the next, and so there's some people raising the question about what really does this mean. I mean, it's a preview article. Who cares? You know, in the sense of that, maybe the article doesn't mean much, or the fact that it said what it said and it moved on. It didn't have a lasting presence. But if you, let's say, wrote a 20,000 word article where you did research for 2 years, I know people who have done this, and they've written, and then someone else takes much of your language composition, they take some of your findings, they take some of your ideas, and without attribution, borrow them and 100%. Weave them into your thing, you would be livid. People live and die trying to make a living with their writing, and for some, or in this case, the YouTube video, and for someone else to take it and not even feel the need to, attribute it at all is, again, maybe not this one article so consequential, but the principle of it is it's theft. It's outright theft. It's identity fraud. And for those reasons, there can be misdemeanor identity fraud and there can be felony identity fraud. But that's what it is.
I thought you guys raised great points. I'll only add two more things. First, I think, and I'll speak for myself here, but I think I can also speak for most of the MMA media, where we almost sort of felt uncomfortable about the whole situation because Kenny is so well liked. I mean, this is a guy who has always
been around for a long time.
Yeah, he's always played it straight. He's always been great to the media. I think we all enjoy his work, but he's not controversial like Chael Sonnen. He's not even controversial like a Daniel Cormier in that regard. Like, he's always kind of just been down the middle, and everyone kind of likes him. So I think it's been interesting to see the reaction to it, because I think everyone feels strongly about plagiarism, but also feels strongly about how much respect we have for Kenny, and that's why you deal with these mixed emotions. I will also say, and I will say this to him, and I've said it to others, I wish he would have handled it differently every step of the way, including most recently, because I think America and the public in general, they want to feel remorse. They want to feel like you are remorseful. And I always think back to the way Andy Pettit dealt with his PED accusations as opposed to Roger Clemens or Barry Bonds. He came out and say, I messed up. And no one talks about Andy Pettit as a PED user. I mean, it's there, but it's not like the other guys, because he was just, he was remorseful and everyone moved along. And that initial tweet about saying made me realize that he doesn't really get it. And even after the fact, if it was me, and I hope to God that I'm never put in a position like this, I'm sorry, I messed up. I feel horrible. I want to invite Lee on my show to clear the air. I want to give him a platform. I want to talk about this. I can't apologize enough. I hope I'll be able to regain your trust. And it felt like there was almost this combative attitude towards the whole thing. It's like, look, we mess up. We all mess up, whether it's on a grand scale like this or privately. We mess up. And at the end of the day, he didn't beat anyone up. He didn't take drugs. He messed up, and he was uncomfortable maybe as a writer. He doesn't do this often. He didn't go to journalism school. We want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I just wish he'd shown more remorse after the fact by explaining to everyone that, look, I will never do this again. I'm so sorry to Lee and to all of you, the people who trust and respect me as an analyst. I can assure you this will never happen again. I wish that was the route that was taken, as opposed to almost like, you don't need to tell us about what you did, your background, your resume. We know who you are. We love Kenny Florian. Like, everyone's a fan of his. Just feel sorry for it. And no one could tell him, but that's the way I would have handled it, because I feel like that's the way I would have reacted to it.
And then lastly, it's just a good reminder, just if you find something cool, just attribute it to the person you found it to.
There's nothing wrong with that.
And I'm sure if you go through the history of my work, I'm sure I've forgotten it at certain points, for which I apologize in advance. We've all had lapses. But if you see something cool, share it. And hey, I found it from this person.
There is an approach online in this day and age to not source people. It drives me nuts. And sometimes people will say, and there's no way that you can find any kind. I mean, I know if someone tweets something and he has 6 followers, it's hard to know that that guy, broke it first. But no matter where I am or what I'm doing, I always, even on this show, we mentioned other outlets. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't feel like if MMAfighting.com sources MMA Junkie or SureDog or MMA Weekly, that people are going to go to that site and never come to us ever again. I believe that it should be harmonious in that regard. Like, we give each other credit. There's nothing wrong with it. And I don't want to speak for him. I don't think it was malicious. I truly, truly don't. And that's not to absolve him of this. An oversight is an oversight. Whatever, I don't think he meant to screw this Lee Wiley guy. I think he goofed, as Dana White would say. And there's nothing wrong with saying sorry.
I think he goofed, as Dana White would say.
Yeah.
Or as Dana White would say.
All right. On that note,
Sorry.
we're done.
Come on, guys.
We're done.
Chuck has been very jokey the whole
Yeah,
episode.
what's up with that?
I don't know, man.
Something in this cup.
IPAs last week, jokes
That's
this
right.
week.
That's right. All right, we are done. Thank you so very much for watching. Up in the air right now if we're going to have a show next week, because as you know, the UFC is in New Jersey. We've got to cover all that. There's a media day on Thursday, but we'll keep you posted. Don't worry. And of course, we'll have our usual content all week long from all of us here. I think Jeff will be sending out some tweets or maybe an article.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. But we appreciate you stopping by once again. All right, have a great weekend. That is Luke. That is Jeff. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. Again, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you very soon.